which is not something you'd be able to do. Well, not currently. I don't think. So using procedural content generation on the fly actually lets you produce absolutely huge environments. That's one of the things which has been used quite extensively in the past. So think of the artist. So you're going to be able to work? It's not a threat. It actually makes your life better as an artist. If you view it as becoming an art director rather than just an artist, you get a huge amount of content, and then you can actually decide what you want to use. You can actually have an entire city generated and then change things around to the way you want them. A lot of techniques require artist input, and the artist's eye is still critical to this, but it allows you to do projects at a scale which would be impossible with the team sizes which we generally have. Even with the team sizes on games, for instance, Assassin's Creed or Grand Theft Auto, they're still looking at these forms of content generation. A lot of them are used. In feature films also, King Kong, which I've got some examples of coming up, they use procedural content generation for New York City, just using non-scripting and Python scripting in Maya. At the very least, the user has the ability to choose whether the accepted quality or not, but at most you can actually define very precise rules which will produce results which are reproducible within parameters which you set. So it's not just press button and make art, it's actually an awful lot more than that. And again, quoting William Latham. People here know William Latham? He was one of the first people to actually produce fractal 3D images. I think it was called organic art. It was one of the first things that got on the front cover of Computer Arts. And he viewed the artist as a gardener, that you plant seeds and you actually prune things and you let it develop in ways that you like. So that's one way of looking at procedural art. And another reason why I'm quite interested at the moment is because art tends to be the time which it comes from. So the Renaissance was rebirth of classical, Cubism, First World War, Spanish Civil War, pop art, 60s and 70s, comic books and advertising. And today we are dealing with a society which is hugely influenced by computers and genetic engineering. And that's basically what procedural content is. It's genetics and computing. So it's of its time. What can you produce procedurally? Almost anything. Almost anything. Because the world which we live in is based on procedures. If you understand those procedures and break them down, you can actually do almost anything which exists in the real world. Things which have been done in the past, going back to early days of computer graphics. Modeling is something which is very, very common for procedural content generation. People here used procedural plants. Yeah? Procedural landscapes. Anybody here play with Bryce or TerraGen? Yeah, they're valuable tools. Texturing. Again, texturing is one of the first things that was done procedurally. It was partly to do with the pipelines in early computer graphics. Also, it has an advantage that procedurally generated textures aren't just in UV space. People know when we talk about UV space? Yes? So it's not just X and Y coordinates, it's also Z. So if you have a rock, you can actually have a texture which changes as you go through the rock. If you cut it in half, you actually have textures there which are contiguous with it. It's a procedure which gives you, every point there has the particular colors which you define. So things like Perlin noise have been around in programs. Like the first one I used would be probably Lightwave, variations in Perlin noise and different noise parameters, allowing you to produce quite interesting textures. In animation, AI agents and ragdoll physics have come a long way. They're at a stage now where we have systems like Euphoria, which basically produce what is as close as we can get to at the moment to a nervous system for a model. So it will react in ways, rather than just knowing which way joints will break and look pretty ropey in terms of most ragdoll. It'll actually duck, it'll actually turn various directions. It actually will take input and change based on that. Music has been produced procedurally back to Brian Eno, and possibly before. I believe Some used time in the 16th century, musicians were using mathematical formula and randomness to produce music, because music is mathematical in nature, and you can actually produce interesting music with it. Optimization and logging, which used to take lots of time. There are now systems which will actually do this based on rules which you give it. You say where you want your silhouette to be, how many polys you want to drop, and where you want your texture seams to be, and it will actually work with that. Within that, producing a result which should be what you're looking for. You can still change it. It's not going to be perfect, but it'll get you about 90% of the way there. And if you can think of anything else that you can do procedurally, I think there's almost nothing that couldn't be done if you write the rules. If you understand what the rules are and take the problem apart, understand the grammar of what's being done there and the randomness of what needs to be there to produce variation, you can produce almost anything. So when can you use it? Almost any time during your process. Pre-production is really good because you get quick results. For rapid prototyping, things like Poser and Bryce use some feature films. So we'll learn from feature films. They use these. These are procedural. They're cheap, off-the-shelf products which cost you maybe 150, 200 bucks. And if you want to prototype something, feature films use them. So think about that for a start. In production, there's a lot of middleware solutions for offline generation of content, like people here probably use Drone, SpeedTree, yeah. City Engine, which is one of the coolest ones, or Xfrog, which is another vegetation modeling package. And you can still use procedural content in games, actually on the side of the actual game being played. So you can generate textures, models, even levels, and even some level events on the fly. Landscape can be stored as a seed, and then a mesh produced. Procedural textures, for instance, air is an excellent example of procedural compression of texture, which I'll show you some of this in a couple of minutes. These things are being used by major players in the games world. So worthwhile looking at. And now I've got the cool videos, which means I can stop talking for a bit. Hopefully. Let me see if I can find you a video. I've got a bunch of stuff to show you. So, let's start off with procedural character generation. This is a free program called Make Human, which has reasonably good human topology, reasonably good polygon flow. And it allows you to actually produce any age, ethnic group, gender, by just changing the parameters. Not perfect, but as a start to your process, if you're trying to produce a 15-year-old African child or a 90-year-old Asian man for a game that have to interact and you don't have time, you can get quite close to this. And you can actually change it on the fly. It is kind of similar to Poser in some ways, but I think its base topology is better and it is more an artist's tool rather than avoiding art. So you can see that you can work in details within this. And work through, come on, tetra-rigid. Let's get installed. Yeah. There may be some nakedness here. I do apologize. Not entirely anatomically accurate. So you can make the characteristics of the face more male, more female. A little bit saggy.
It's always small, isn't it?
Yep.
As what format?
I think it's basically OBJ, but I think you get a lot of other things. It's just a standard mesh. It's used throughout. It's looking a bit sadder now. So it's exactly the same mesh flow and topology for all of these. It's not creating more points or vertices.